Okay, so can everybody see the PowerPoint and then can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so my name is Amber Killian. I'm the Domestic Violence Program Manager here at Freedom House. I've been here about 12 years, and right now I'm in charge of running the emergency shelter program and the front office, which includes our 24-hour hotline. Just for purposes of the presentation, I am gonna use he and she a lot, although I do realize that domestic violence happens across all gender identities. But because of my 12-year experience, I worked primarily with women. I'll use those pronouns, but again, I'm not discounting that it doesn't happen in other orientations. So you will hear me say he, she a lot. Also, just so you know, domestic violence in general looks very different for each person that's going through it. So there's going to be some similarities across the board with abusive partners and victims of abuse. A lot of this stuff, though, is, again, it's on a spectrum. It's not set in stone for each individual person. So I hope to give you kind of an overview of what domestic violence looks like, what to look for in your families that you're working with or families that you know. Because if you don't know anybody that's going through this right now, it's probably just because you don't know, or they haven't told you yet, or you will meet somebody someday that is going through this. So we'll go through the PowerPoint and then we'll open it up for questions at the end. And if you need clarification on anything, just go ahead and let me know. So if you looked up domestic violence, this would be the definition: an ongoing pattern of coercive behavior where one person attempts to control the other through different tactics. When someone's calling the hotline and they kind of don't really understand if what's happening in their relationship is domestic violence or not, the main things we look for is the pattern, which is the cycle. It's happening over and over in their relationship. And we're really looking for the power and control tactics. The issue with the definition is that if anybody off the street that's not familiar with domestic violence or it hasn't happened to them, if they read this definition, it wouldn't even come close to giving them a picture as to what's going on with some of these families in their home. Here's some general statistics, but as far as Freedom House is concerned, in fiscal year 20, we served 400 adult clients, 237 children. We provided over 7,000 hours of service and answered over 500 hotline calls. We were able to assist and get granted 164 orders of protection. 28 of those orders of protection were for men against women. So a little bit about our agency: we serve Bureau, Marshall, Putnam, Stark, and Henry County. So those numbers are from our entire service area. We are the only domestic violence and sexual assault program in that 5-county area. And, you know, that area size is bigger than the state of Rhode Island. So, you know, that kind of puts it into perspective as to how many people we serve. There's a lot of myths that come with domestic violence. We spend a lot of time talking to our clients about these things. And even when we do like our volunteer training course, we spend a lot of time on myths and talking about what our own beliefs and biases are, because we all have them. Before I worked in domestic violence, I might have agreed with some of these statements just because I was uneducated and I didn't know. So as you read down the list, I'm just going to make a few points about each one. Domestic violence is everyone's business, because when we keep it a secret or we turn a blind eye to it, it's not helping anyone. And we know that it can become a learned behavior through generations, and it does incur substantial cost to society. Domestic violence costs about $4.1 billion a year, and that's in medical costs, mental health costs, and lost productivity. We know domestic violence is a crime, so it is serious. It's a crime. And the acts that can't be charged as a crime tend to have long-lasting effects on people's psyche. So the emotional, the mental abuse, the financial abuse, you know, some of those things can't be charged as crimes, but again, it has long-lasting effects. Whatever issues occur in a relationship, the violence is never justified. So saying that a victim provokes their partners, that partner has the choice to walk away from that partner or to choose another way to deal with that argument or that, the fight that's happening. They have a choice. So it's never justified. We always teach that abuse is not a loss of control. It's about taking control, not just of the partner. When we think control, we think what they wear, where they go, and that does happen, but also taking control of the situation, taking control of an argument, and engaging the victim to argue and then twisting their words around to create further abuse. No one would physically abuse while pregnant. That's really untrue. Abuse may begin during pregnancy. It often begins during pregnancy, and it often escalates during pregnancy. Homicide is the single most frequent cause of maternal death during pregnancy and in the first year after birth. And the reason for that is because the victim's attention is no longer catering to the abusive partner. So it's that kind of loss of control during pregnancy where her focus is on something different than the abuser. Women are just as violent. Do women abuse? Yeah, they do. We had, like I said, 28 orders of protection against women last year, but women rarely commit deliberate acts that result in fear, injury, rape, or death. So when someone's calling here and saying that they're a victim of domestic violence, we're looking for, are they afraid of their partner? Has there been injury before? Has there been sexual abuse? Because a lot of times, most times, sexual assault and abuse go hand in hand with domestic violence. So we talked about the Freedom House statistics. It's easy for victims to leave. We know that's, again, not the case. There's plenty of legitimate reasons why a woman would stay in the relationship that has domestic violence, and fear is number one. Fear of what might happen to them, fear of, okay, so I live in Marshall County, and if I leave, I got to go to Freedom House, which is in Bureau County, and how are my kids going to go to school, and will I be able to feed my kids, and where are they going to sleep, and what does the shelter look like, and can I bring my pet, and all these different things are legitimate reasons, and not only to say that 70% of women die from domestic violence after they've left the situation. And that's because abuse and stalking tend to escalate after leaving. So a lot of people think, oh, just leave the relationship, it'll be over. And that is rarely the case. Long-term stalking, harassment, physical abuse, and death often occur after leaving. 90% of our children will be witness to this abuse. Witnessing means either they're in the room when it's happening. A lot of times, mom will pick up the kid thinking that it'll stop that partner from furthering the abuse. And sometimes kids get hurt in the process. So either witnessing being directly there or witnessing mom's emotions afterwards, or the dad's emotions, or waking up in the morning and seeing the aftermath, broken things. They can tell what's happening. Even in the womb, fetuses can be affected. And a lot of children that we see, if you were to look up effects or behaviors of children that come from domestic violence and put it right next to a list of ADHD behaviors, it's hand in hand. They almost look identical. And so when we're talking about children and diagnosing these things with children, we need to look a little bit deeper to find out if there's domestic violence or things of that nature going on in the home, because the symptoms that develop are almost identical. Abusers need counseling. That's true. And a lot of our clients come in and that's what they want. They don't want to leave the relationship. They just want the abuse to stop, and they want their partner to get counseling. And so we need to talk about what counseling is appropriate. Anger management really isn't appropriate for domestic violence because they focus on this anger problem. And that's another excuse, another thing for the abuser to say, well, it's just my anger problem. There's no responsibility taken. Couples counseling, domestic violence is beyond couples counseling. Couples counseling is for people who have a communication issue. And so you can't really go into a couples counseling session and really be candid about what's going on in the relationship and then think you're going to be safe at home. So we really recommend partner abuse intervention programming. It's the only type of programming that really focuses on the responsibility and the choices of the abusive partner.
Amber, can I ask a question really quick?
Yeah.
You said that the abusers typically need counseling. Is that what you meant, that like the person doing the abuse can get counseling at Freedom House? Is that right?
They can't get counseling at Freedom House, but we are in the school of thought of prevention is everything. So we do believe that people who are abusive can change and choose different things. And so we always recommend the counseling, but we don't do the counseling. We're strictly victim services. But if anybody ever comes into a situation where they want to know where local PAPE programming, it's called PAPE, which is Partner Abuse Intervention Programming, you can call the local DHS office and they'll give you a list of places that offer PAPE. The next slide, types of abuse. Of course, you can see the list. There's many different types of abuse. And I think just what I want to say about this is that abusers really know how to torment their victims without going over the line. A lot of times they do just enough to instill fear, to interfere with personal liberty, which leaves the victim really feeling helpless because, again, they know what they can do before going over that edge so that they're not getting in trouble, or so that they can manipulate the partner into thinking that what's happening really isn't that bad. Oh, wait, let me see. I got somebody else trying to come in. Okay. So again, many different types of abuse, not just what's on this list. We've seen this and beyond. So we're going to spend some time on the domestic violence power and control wheel. And so when you look in this wheel, this is the tactics that abusers use to gain power and control over their victims. It really depends on the dynamics of the relationship. Sometimes it only takes the use of one piece of this diagram to keep that power and control. So let's say you want to go out with your friends and all I have to do is tell you that you're a bitch or a whore or that you're going to cheat. And that keeps you, you don't want to deal with arguing with me. So you just cancel and you stay home. If that's all I need to do to gain control over that situation, then I won't take it any further if I'm an abuser. I'm just going to use that much. But if you begin to, ignore what I'm saying and go out anyways, then maybe next time I'll have to use a little bit more force. When women come in or men come in and they're victims of domestic violence, we'll hand them this wheel and say, highlight anything on this wheel that looks familiar to you. And a lot of times the whole thing is highlighted and they just can't believe, even though they're in the relationship and they know what's happening, they've been so manipulated to think that it's their fault. And if they just change what they're doing, then the abuse won't happen anymore. They don't really understand the dynamics of this power and control wheel. And sometimes in relationships without domestic violence, some of these tactics are used, but the way that it plays out in domestic violence relationships is different when you have that ring around the side that includes the physical and the sexual violence. So when the outside factors are present, it's going to affect how those tactics play out. It's a way to achieve dominance over the partner. It changes how she will respond to that engagement to argue or that economic abuse. If someone says, well, I'm not giving you any money, in a relationship where there's no fear of domestic violence, she or he may say, well, yeah, you are, it's both of ours. And then there'll be a discussion. But if in domestic violence, she may just say, okay, it just really depends. The tactics are used. He gets power and control her again, or the situation. With physical and sexual abuse, there's a great deal of sexual abuse in relationships. I know I said that before, but it does go hand in hand because abuse doesn't just stop at the bedroom door. His way of thinking does not stop at the bedroom door. And that's the biggest thing about domestic violence. It's not about how people feel. It's about the way people think. They abuse because of how they think, not because of how they feel. Make up sex after an argument. We hear victims talk about that a lot. And even abusers will say, we had great makeup sex and all this, but if you talk to the victim, it's usually the most humiliating sex that the victim's ever had. The intimidation piece, that walks with that abusive partner wherever he goes in the home. It's generated by violence that he's used in the past, and it's linked to his ability to overcome anyone's resistance in the home. Without intimidation, it makes it very difficult to achieve the goal and whatever force that person may use. With emotional abuse, usually that happens more often. It's a way to get her to understand that she's less than. So with emotional abuse, and we'll see with isolation, they kind of go hand in hand. If I isolate you and I'm emotionally abusing you, putting you down, making you feel bad about yourself and saying horrible things about you, eventually my voice as an abuser will become your voice in your head. And so sometimes those become your truths and you forget that those are just tactics of abuse. Constant put downs is a way of getting her to believe that she couldn't survive without him. Hitting causes fear and pain, of course, but emotional abuse diminishes who that person is. And it's some of the hardest things for women to overcome is that emotional abuse, because they lose themselves in that. And they believe that there's something other. They believe that there's someone other than who they were when they first got in that relationship. With isolation, that's usually the first power and control tactic that happens. It's not like an abuser comes in, kicking the door in, saying, you can't go anywhere or do anything. These are very subtle tactics that increase over time and are introduced very minimally over time, almost like a grooming tactic. The purpose is to keep you from hearing other voices. It's subtle. It's subtle as they create an argument every time that the person wants to go out, like we talked about, so that it gets to the point that it's so exhausting that they just don't want to go. Limited privacy, checking your phone, having tracking apps on your phone, making you feel like your friends and family aren't supporting you, like, oh, your mom just wants to meddle in our relationship, or, oh, your best friend she isn't good for you and she wants to be a bad influence, or she's jealous of that relationship. And it kind of makes you start to think and believe what they're saying. And so not only do abusers isolate their victims, but victims also isolate themselves a lot of times. With the minimizing, denying, and blaming, 100% of abusers do this, and 100% of victims do this. They minimize how often it happens, deny that it's even happening. Abusers blame the victim blames themselves. And if she defends herself in any of these situations, he'll usually up the ante, and it's always the victim's fault, and they both believe that. So that's another reason why it's so hard for people to escape domestic violence when you think that you're doing something wrong. Because a lot of times these things are going to happen behind closed doors. There's a reason why this person can control themselves in every other scenario except for behind closed doors with you. And so that's something to look for, and that's another reason why victims think it's their fault. Well, this person's good with everybody else. There must be something just wrong with me. But the fact of the matter is they abuse their victim because they can and because it works. Those tactics that you see would not work on their boss or their friends and things like that. Using children. So victims often, or abusers often, use children as a way of leverage to get her to start doing things they want her to do, or to stop doing things they want her to stop doing. And although women will say, well, he's a really good father and he loves his kids. That's true. He may love his kids, but his desire to control the situation and make the partner pay for certain things supersedes that love, because they will use children as a tool to get back at her. Threaten to take the children. I mean, any mom knows that if someone threatens to take your kids away, especially if they have the financial power to do so, or let's say maybe you're a mom that maybe smokes marijuana, or has a pill issue or something like that, that's normal for people who are in domestic violence. They may try to use that against you, like, oh, I'm going to call DCFS, I'm going to make it seem like you're a bad mom and take your kids. And because his threats have had so much power before, a victim's going to believe that, even if subconsciously she knows that a court wouldn't just rip kids out of a mother's life it'd have to be a really horrible situation for them to do that, even though she may know deep down that there's no possibility of losing those children. She's not going to chance that at all. So most moms will stay in those relationships so that they can at least make sure that their kids are safe. She understands that there's a possibility that he could achieve that goal because he's achieved other things in the past. The male privilege part, that's a notion that as a man in a relationship with a woman, he believes he's entitled to use these power and control tactics. And it even is so deeply ingrained that he feels that even if he lets go of that control, it's going to diminish him as a person. So it's that whole male privilege way of thinking. The economic abuse, well, to an abusive partner, money is power. If you control the money, you control the household. Especially with abusers who don't pay child support or help the woman out financially with the children. And sometimes the victims will say, it's fine. I don't want the hassle. Like, I'll just take care of my kids and I don't need anything from him. But he's actually winning in that situation because it's affecting her ability to move forward. And that's part of the power and control. If she doesn't have that financial support from that person, she may not be able to afford childcare. She may not be able to afford a house versus an apartment. She may end up living with family and friends. So the economic abuse can come in many different forms. If she has access to resources in the community, that means she has access to leave. So it's about cutting off that access. It's a form of isolation. It's stopping you from working or, keeping you up all night long, badgering you, and so that you're exhausted the next day at work and you can't function properly, and things like of that nature. Coercion and threats, it's the same kind of tactic as like the violence. Oh no, it says it's going to end in 10 minutes. What happens if it ends in 10 minutes? I've never gone over. Do I just send you another link and we keep going?
I think that will probably be the best option.
Okay. All right. We'll do that then. The coercion and threats, again, if you give me sex, I'll let you see the kids. If you give me drugs, I'll let you go to your family reunion. The threat comes in when the coercion doesn't work. The next thing we use is in educating about domestic violence is the cycle of violence. So you guys have this handout, and really that's what we're looking for in domestic violence. It's the tension building stage that turns into the acute explosion. And with the victim response, with the tension building stage, none of the things that she's doing over here is going to stop that acute explosion from happening. She may think it will, but it usually doesn't. And then the explosion happens. And then it's back to that honeymoon stage. And a lot of women will feel very like relieved, happy, hopeful that that incident of abuse is over and now this person's back to normal and this is who I fell in love with and this is who this person's going to be. And if I made it through that, maybe he was just having a bad day or whatever. But the honeymoon stage is really the most dangerous stage of domestic violence because that's what keeps people in that cycle. It's the most manipulative stage. And one of the biggest tactics that abusers use in the honeymoon stage is threats to kill themselves. If you don't come back to me, I'm going to kill myself. And that threat, it works. It works. So they tend to use it quite often. Effects. Oh, I was going to say too about the cycle of violence. In the beginning of the relationship, you may see just short little glimpses of tension building, like tests of how is the victim going to react when I call her a bitch or tell her this or tell her that. And you'll see long periods of honeymoon stage because it's the beginning of the relationship. And then an explosion happens. And then the person's like, well, this is so out of character. He must have just had a bad day. This is out of character for him. So we'll just excuse this first time. It's not going to happen again. And they go on in that relationship. And as the relationship goes farther, more tension happens. The explosions are more frequent and the honeymoon stage becomes shorter and shorter and shorter. So you also have this wheel, the how violence affects children, affects the domestic violence on children. Again, it's going to affect kids a whole lot differently. You know, it's on a spectrum. I think one thing to know about kids, it's always the loud kid, the kid that's acting out the most, that gets the attention, and that you can clearly know something is probably happening or going on. But we also need to watch for the quiet kids too, the ones that are really good in school and get really good grades and are focused. That doesn't mean that they don't have these issues going on at home either. Maybe they just focus on their grades as an escape, and they do really well in a environment where they can flourish, like at school. You may have kids that act out in school a lot because, you know, maybe they're little sisters at home and they know their mom and dad's home and they're afraid of, they're not there to protect their sister or brother, or their own mother, or those kinds of things. So they may not be able to concentrate. So effects of domestic violence on kids are just, they're all over the place. You're never going to have an exact idea of what that looks like. I just wanted to spend a few minutes on strangulation because it's the most lethal form of domestic violence. It's often called the last warning shot. And so if you ever have people disclosing to you that there was strangulation involved, you really need to recommend that they come talk to well, first get medical attention, but also come and talk maybe to one of our advocates. You know, strangulation is really minimized. It's sometimes compared to just a slap in the face. 62% of strangulation victims have no visible marks on the outside, but that doesn't mean that there's not damage or things happening on the inside. If a strangulation victim has ever urinated or defecated after strangulation, then, you know, that's even more lethal, because we know what happens to people when they die. They lose their bowel first thing. So this is a huge, huge red flag. It doesn't get much worse after strangulation. So we just, these are just some of the signs to pay attention to. Petechiae is like just little red dots. You know, if you've ever given birth or, you know, vomited really, really hard for a long period of time, you may have the broken blood vessels in your face or in your eyes. And those are really the only two other incidences where you would have petechiae on the skin besides strangulation. So I just wanted to share that because that's a really, really lethal thing. I feel like I should stop here and then just send another quick link. I can make it for 9:40. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So I don't want to have to rush, and I'll make sure that we have time for questions. So I'll just send it to you, Brittany, and then you'll share it to everybody.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'll see you in just a few minutes.